Hey everybody, welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. Let's take a look at creating this very cool vibrant color ring effect. It's a neat effect. It's semi-difficult to figure out how to do, but once you've done it a time or two, it's very cool, and it translates over to other programs like Illustrator fairly easily as well. Before we get going on this tutorial, however, I just want to make a quick announcement. Howard from Iceflow Studios and I are teaming up to create a series of tutorials creating web graphics. We're going to be creating all kinds of cool web graphics. You can check out Howard's site. It's iceflowstudios.com. He's a very talented Photoshop user, designer, teacher, all of the above. And this course is primarily going to be of graphics that we find and we see on 365psd.com. 365psd.com is an amazing resource online. They provide free PSDs, a new one every single day, that you can go and download all kinds of very, very high quality graphics. So we're going to be kind of choosing some of these graphics that they've created, and it's all kinds of different things. Just go and browse and feel free to make suggestions. We're going to be creating tutorials based on PSDs that they offer for free for download. But meanwhile, go check out 365psd.com. Make sure you donate these guys some money, buy one of their downloads, do something like that. It is an amazing resource, and it would be a crying shame to see this go by the wayside. So definitely check them out. And if everybody who watches this video goes over and donates like $2, I mean, how much money would that be? Leave a comment if you can figure it out. So again, Howard and I are going to be getting together doing this series of tutorials. So without further ado, let's go ahead and create this vibrant color ring. I'm going to bring back my Photoshop interface here. I'm going to zoom out just a touch, and I'm going to create a brand new document. We're going to start fresh. Command or Control N, and we can name this anything we want. Vibrant colored ring, something like that's cool. Width 1280, height 720, resolution can remain 72 pixels per inch. Perfect. Go ahead and hit OK. Now, what we want to do is immediately just change our background to something that's a little bit darker, something that's going to be easier to work over. Something maybe easier on the eyes. So I'm just going to hit Command or Control U. This is going to bring up my hue saturation dialog, and I'm going to drop the brightness, maybe negative 60, 65, something like that. That looks cool. On 66, that works. And I'm just going to hold down my Alt or Option key and double click the background layer to free it up, unlock it. Beautiful. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab the ellipse tool. So right over here, we have the ellipse tool. This is not the elliptical marquee tool, this is the ellipse tool. And what we want to do with this is set it to draw paths. It's the center icon right up here in the tool options bar. I'm going to hold down my shift key, and I'm just going to draw out a nice big circle. Size of the circle doesn't really matter. We can adjust all of that later on. Now, what I've just done is not created graphics. I've just created a path. If you're familiar with paths, you know exactly what's going on here. If not, you might be stumped. If we go over to our Paths panel, which is located Window, Paths, right there, you can see we've created this work path. Great. This is going to be the basis of our main circle. We just need to punch a hole in the center of it, and we'll get sort of this ring or donut shape. So let's go ahead and we're just going to double click on this path to save it. So I'm going to double click it, and I'm going to name this guy Base, because I want this to be the base of everything that is to come. What I'm now going to do is grab my Path Selection tool. That's this black arrow down here. You can see we've got Path Selection tool and Direct Selection tool. I'm going to go with the Path Selection tool, and I'm just going to grab my path, just like that. And I'm actually going to slide this guy closer to the center of the document, maybe like that. And again, we're not filling graphics into this layer, no pixels, anything like that. This is all just sort of, you can think of it as a stencil or a guide for Photoshop that we can load as a selection later, or just say, hey, Photoshop, dump stuff inside of this, please. And Photoshop will say, hey, I can do that. Let's go ahead and dump stuff in there. And it works just like that. So what we want to do is we want to somehow punch a hole in the center of this. However, because it's not pixels, we can't just go and grab our elliptical marquee tool and create a selection and delete, boom, and we're done. It doesn't quite work that way. Let's go back and grab our Path Selection tool, make sure we've got our path selected, and we're going to copy this path and paste it right in place. So just Command or Control C and then Command or Control V. Doesn't look like anything's happened, but something has happened. We've copied the path, and now there are two paths on this same sort of path layer, if you will. What I want to do is look up here to the Tool Options bar. And right now we just have one of our paths selected. We want to choose the Subtract from Selection option right there. And you can see when we do that, now here our path layer is saying, hey, you have a path or two in here, but there's nothing going on because this path on top is just completely subtracting away the path underneath it. Well, that's great because all we need to do is free transform this path to cut out a hole in the center. So make this smaller, and it's just going to punch a hole in the center. So I'm going to hit Command or Control T. You can also go Edit, Free Transform, or Transform Path. Oh, Free Transform Path, there we go. and hold down the Shift and Alt key, that would be Shift and Option on the Mac, and just drag this guy closer to the center, something like so. Now check out our paths panel, excuse me. You can see we're creating that nice donut shape. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the check key to commit my changes, and wonderful, we have our first path. Now the problem that I'm going to run into here is if I select this path, it's still two separate paths. You can see if I just select the outside ring, it's not selecting the inside ring too. That's going to be a problem for me, because if I want to grab the outside ring and move it, all of a sudden I have, you know, a ball with a little shine on it and not a donut shape. Very bad. I'm going to undo that. What I want to do is select both of these paths, and up here I've got this little button, Combine. We're going to hit that, and now it's one path. Adobe is treating it as one path. If I fill it, it's just going to be the inner donut shape that's being filled. Great. Let's now go ahead and copy this, and we're going to paste it onto a new path layer. We're basically going to duplicate this path. So I've got my path selection tool. Again, select the whole path, Command or Control C to copy, and then go ahead right down here in the bottom corner. We've got the Create New icon. With the layers icon, it creates a new layer. Here it's going to create a new path. You can see our old path, well, has disappeared. It hasn't, it's still there, but we're on a new path layer, if you will. I'm going to hit Command or Control V to paste this guy right in. This is great. All I need to do now is get rid of this inner circle. Now, I could have just duplicated the path earlier, but then maybe you wouldn't have quite a solid understanding of how exactly you can work with paths. We're going to kind of do this the hard way, just so you can learn it. It's really not that hard, but it's just maybe not the most convenient way. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the Direct Selection tool. The Direct Selection tool allows you to not just wholesale select a path. You see with the Path Selection tool, if I even run over part of the path, it's going to select the entire path. The Direct Selection tool allows you to select segments, anchor points, or parts of a path. All I want to do is select this center path here. So I'm going to just highlight that, and you can see that those anchor points are solid, and the ones on the outer path are now hollow. I'm going to hit the Delete key. Knock that path right out of there, and we're back to that original circle we created. So that's just a little sort of side tip within this tutorial of how you can a way you can work with paths, and just something that's very good to know. Now that we have this, let's name this. Let's go ahead and name it Path 1, just to start things off. What I want to do, however, before we get working on Path 1 is get some guides in here and get the initial shape laid down, so we kind of have some context as far as what we're working on, where we need to place things, and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and select the base path layer. I'm going to go back to my Layers panel, and I'm going to select this drop-down menu, which is going to drop out of window here. So let me bring this guy way up here so you can see what's going on. I'm going to select this, and I'm just going to choose Solid Color. It's a solid color adjustment layer. And normally you could go layer, new adjustment layer, all that yada yada yada, but solid color isn't up in the menu for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. We're going to go ahead and create just some kind of blue or purple that's easy on the eyes, maybe something like this, or let's just go with 666699, something like that. There we go. Hit OK. Lovely. I'm going to bring my layers panel back into where it belongs, like so. Cool, so we've got sort of our initial donut shape laid down. We're going to go back to the path. Actually, we can name this layer right now before we forget. Donut, just like so. Now we're going to go back to the Paths panel. You can see we've got this new sort of path layer. It's saying, hey, here's the donut vector mask. Great, we don't want to mess with that. We're going to leave that alone, let Adobe do its thing, or let Photoshop really do its Photoshop-y thing. And then we're going to come back up here to base. However, we're going to come to path, excuse me. What we want to do now is grab our path selection tool and select the entire shape like so. Now what we need to do is we need to determine, really, I would like to know where the exact center of my circle is, just as a general reference as we're working through this. So we'll see if we even end up using these guides or not, who knows. We're going to go, we're going to say show, well, we're going to show the rulers. There they are, Control R, Command R on the Mac. And we're just going to click on a ruler and drag a new guide out. And because I've got snapping turned on, which is View Snap, these guides are going to sort of snap to these anchor points. You can see right there. It's going to run right through that anchor point, and I'm going to do the same up here for this point for the vertical lines. I'm going to grab the vertical ruler, I'm going to drag that right out. Bam. There we go. So we've got sort of the nearly exact center within a pixel or so of the exact center of our donut. Now that we've done that, we want to go ahead and start creating these swoosh shapes that we see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Path 1 right here. And I'm going to grab, well, it is selected, so I've grabbed it, and I'm going to hit Command or Control T. Again, this is bringing up Free Transform. And what I want to do is just pull the bottom point up so it's just resting right here into the center of the donut. I'm going to zoom way in so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. This is where things start to get a little tricky, so just try to hang with me here. We're going to set our reference point to the top center point right up there, so it's going to move our reference point right up there. Wonderful. And I'm just going to drag this guy right up into there. Now I'm going to hit Command or Control and the plus key to zoom way in here, and I want it to just be entering into the middle of our donut, something like that. Just so we don't run into any issues later on down the road. It might make no sense if you don't quite understand why I'm doing this. Well, even if you know how to work with paths, you might not totally understand quite yet, but you'll see why later. So just overlap it by just a couple pixels. Just run it off so we've got a nice smooth transition happening over here to the left. Great. Now that we've done that, we want to go ahead and squeeze the sides of this path in a little bit right here. So what I want to do is hold down my Alt or Option key and just nudge them right in. Just like about so. That should be cool right there. And I'm going to hit the little check icon up here to commit those changes. Now we're going to select path 1 and copy it. It is selected, so I'm going to hit Command or Control C to copy it. And we're going to create a new path right here with this little Create New Path icon. There we go. And we've got path 2. Paste this guy right into place. Command or Control V. Oh, looks like I didn't select path 1. Let's make sure we select it. Command or Control C. Paste it right in there, Command or Control V. Great, now that we've done that, all we need to do is we can just flip this guy right over. So I'm going to hit Command or Control T and right click, flip vertical. Wonderful. And I'm going to drag him right down until the bottom anchor point here is aligned with the bottom of our ellipse, or until the top anchor point is just into the center of the donut, just like we had it before. Let's work with the center of the donut, since that's more like what we were zoomed way in and working precision with. So there we go. Just take it maybe 1 or 2 pixels just below our little purple. My pixel grid is starting to show up there. Don't worry if you see that. And there we go. Something like that's great. I'm going to hit the check icon to commit those changes. So now we have these 2 paths, this one and this one, and this one and this one. What we need to do now is somehow begin merging them so we can get this swooshing shape that's going to cut across and start over here, ride right up over the ring, and then just fade off nicely into the edge somewhere out over here. And we're going to need 2 of these swooshes, and you'll see exactly how we're going to work with them in a moment. Before we get much further, we want to go ahead and edit this path 1, because path 1 is going to be our swoosh. If we create one swoosh perfectly, we should just be able to duplicate that and rotate it around the ring. That's one of the reasons that we want to be picky about being as precise as possible. And if we run off, we want to run off into the gray a little bit, so when we mask it all to our donut shape, it's going to be a nice, curved, perfect edge. Go ahead and grab the direct selection tool. That's going to be this guy right here, the white arrow. And we want to select just the anchor point on the right side of our path 1. So I'm just going to drag a selection out just like so. There we go. And I'm going to use my shift and the arrow keys, and I'm just going to nudge it way out over here, just like that. And then I'm going to actually click on the point, and it's going to reveal the tangent handles. I'm going to grab the tangent handle pointing down, and I'm going to hold my shift key, and I'm just going to pull it straight down until it gets to about there. So if you can imagine now, within this funky shape that we just created, we have our first swoosh. The one point is going to be right over here, and it's going to swoosh up and around, and it's going to end somewhere right out over here. And we need to begin cutting away all of the rest of this. Just to give you a quick example, this, well, right here is sort of one of our swooshes. You can see it's just going to curve right up and over. And it would begin here, down here at this point. It's going to ride right up and over, and at the end of it's right over here. So that's one swoosh. Even though it looks like multiple, don't worry about that. I'll show you how to create that effect. It's kind of neat. So we're going to come back to this, and we've got our very rough shape happening here. Great. We're going to go ahead now, and we're going to punch the center. We're going to get rid of this just chunk of center first. So we're going to get rid of that for this path 1 as well as path 2, because we don't need it in either of them. So we're going to do that by selecting base. Again, using the direct selection tool, just grab that center chunk, and we're going to go ahead and copy it, and we're going to paste it onto a new path layer here, just so we're not going to mess anything up. So there we go, we've got it. Let's grab our path selection tool and just make sure the path is selected. And what we want to do is we want to change this to this second guy right here, this subtract from selection area. Let's go with that first and see what that does for us. So we're going to copy this path. We're going to come up here to path 1, and we're going to paste this in place, Command or Control V. And you can see here over in our paths panel, look at that, we knocked the center right out of it. Great. I'm going to come down here to path 2, and let's just paste it in place again. And you can see we've done the same exact thing. Knocked that center right out. Wonderful. Now we're really getting somewhere. What we need to do is we need to split path 2 in half. This is where the guides are going to come in handy. We need to get rid of this entire half right here of this path. And we're going to do that by basically overlaying another path. I'll show you exactly in a second. But the reason we need to do that is because this part of this sort of swooshing curved line is overlapping where our swoosh begins, right down here. So if we just take this guy and subtract it from this path, we're going to be cutting out a bunch of stuff we really need over here. So we only want to save this portion of it that's going to cut this curve into our swoosh shape. So let's go ahead and grab path 2. I'm going to grab actually the rectangle tool, and I'm going to set it right here in the tool option bar. You can go ahead right there and just say, hey, subtract from path area, right there. Only draw paths, and again, because I have snapping turned on, what's going to happen is when I drag this out, it's going to snap right to my guide, and you can see here in path 2, we're taking a big chunk out of our sort of swooshing curved area, but it still looks a little funky. We can remedy that by just selecting the path selection tool. Go ahead and grab both paths, and again, right here, hit the combine tool. Combine, and you can see we're left with just sort of this little horn shape. Perfect. That's exactly what we need. Now what we can do, select the horn shape, set this to subtract from the path area, copy this, and we're going to go up to path 1, and we're going to paste it right into place. Command or Control V. And you can see now we're cutting that out of path 1. So we're getting closer and closer to getting the swoosh shape that we need. I'm going to go ahead and select both of these paths, and I'm going to hit Combine. Now all that's left to do, well, you can see we've got some excess stuff coming along right in there. Don't really worry about that. Hopefully it's not going to affect us too much. We might go in and mess with it later, but don't be too concerned with that. Actually, if we are concerned with it, what we can do is back up, Command or Control Z, and step backward 1, which is what I've just done. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this path, and I'm just going to nudge it to the left, maybe 1 pixel. So just like that. That should rectify that. Maybe 2 pixels. Let's go 2 pixels. Why not? So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come up here to path 1. I'm going to paste it. Now I'm going to select both of them. And you can see we're cutting it right out. I'm going to go ahead and hit Combine. You can see we've corrected that little many little anchor points showing up where the path was not quite reading correctly. Now all that we have left to do is go ahead and basically tell Photoshop to get rid of all the stuff outside of the donut area. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to select the base path, highlight it, Command or Control C to copy, go down to path 1, and we're just going to paste it. You can see because we haven't used any of these options up in the tool options bar that it's really looking a little funky over here in our paths panel right now. Don't worry about that because we really couldn't use the subtract from because that would get rid of all the stuff that we wanted to keep and only keep the junk that we want to get rid of. What instead we need to use is the intersect shape areas icon. That's going to get rid of all of the stuff outside of the donut. Only save the stuff where both our paths are intersecting each other or overlapping each other. And there we go. We've saved the part of the swoosh within the donut. We need to get rid of all these other paths, so we're going to hit the Combine button. There we go. We have a nice swoosh. So that's our first swoosh. We're going to go ahead and select the swoosh, and we're going to copy it. Command or Control C, and I'm actually going to double-click on this path here, and I'm going to name this horn, or you can name it hook or whatever. Create a new path, and we're going to name this path Path 2, just for the sake of Path 1 is our first swoosh, Path 2 will be our second swoosh. Command or Control V to paste that guy in place. What we now need to do is rotate this so this point is right about here, just above this first horizontal guide. You can see the second swoosh is going to start right here. So this is our second swoosh wrapping way around. We have our first swoosh and we've got our second swoosh. It looks a little complicated. It is kind of tricky, but that's all part of the fun of creating this effect is it looks so difficult to create, and it's maybe a little tricky to create, but once you get it, it's awesome. So we're going to go ahead and select this path, and we need to free transform it and just rotate it right around our ring. So I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and here again the guides are going to come in handy. We're going to drag our transform point, or reference point, excuse me, right here to the center. Just line it up in the exact center of the ring. Use those guides to help you out, and we're just going to slide this guy right around to right about there. Something like that. And we keep a very nice little tight spiral, and our swoosh is exactly where we need it. So we're going to go ahead and commit that change, and there we go. We have 1 swoosh, 2 swoosh. I'm going to save my document, and we're going to go ahead and actually start building this really cool effect. We've spent all this time creating these paths, which has been tricky. Hopefully we've learned a lot about creating paths, which is always interesting, and paths are super useful anyway. So we're going to go over to, well, we're going to select path 1 here, which is really our first swoosh. I'm actually going to clear the guides away. I don't think I need them at this point, so I'm just going to go show guides just to hide them in case we need them later. Select path 1, go to the layers panel, and we're going to, again, add a color fill layer. And How am I going to do this here? Well, I'll just remove my layers panel so it's up here for you guys to see. It could probably be better that way. And I'm going to select this drop-down menu. And I'm going to hit solid color. Wonderful. Now you can see that the color is automatically going to mask itself to the selected path. Great. It's a vector mask. Beautiful. Fill it with white just so we can see it easily. And it's going to make our layers panel look a little bit nicer, a little bit cleaner, and just a little bit brighter. I like working in bright spaces. So there we have it. We've got our first swoosh shape. Very nice. What we're going to do with this guy is we're going to apply a series of layer styles to this and then essentially duplicate them through a second swoosh we create and just tweak them a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and hit add layer style, and the first thing I'm going to do is go to blending options. What we need to do here is get rid of the fill opacity. We need to get rid of all this white. This is just sort of a placeholder or a blank transparent layer, if you will, to hold other layer styles for us. So I'm going to reduce the fill opacity to 0. Opacity would get rid of it, but it would also get rid of any layer styles we apply to it as well. We just want to reduce the fill opacity. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to choose gradient overlay. Now we're going to be working with our gradients in a very specific way, and I'll show you why in a little bit, but we're basically going to be working with black to white, just all monochromatic colors, or lack of color, and we're going to be using our blend modes a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and set the blend mode here to overlay. So I'm going to start with black on the bottom, white on top, just like so. And I like that. I'm going to leave that as is. And, well, I might change the scale a little bit, just reduce the scale just a touch. I don't know. I kind of like that. That's cool. And we're going to go ahead to inner shadow. And we're going to set our blend mode here to overlay again. We're going to set the foreground color to white. And I'm going to boost the opacity to 100 just for now. I'm going to uncheck use global light. And we're going to set the angle to, let's go 90. No, let's go 0. No, I want to bring it all the way over here. So that'll be 180. There we go. That looks cool. And you can see that this has given us kind of this very not so great looking 90s bevel and emboss effect. I'm not a huge fan of it. Let's reduce the size to 0 so we get a very nice sharp cutting effect. Very nice. And we'll probably go ahead and reduce the opacity of this inner shadow just a little bit. Maybe drop it down to 80, something like that. Again, we're using overlay because overlay is going to allow this stroke, which is really an inner shadow, but we're using it like a stroke. It's going to allow that to interact with any color beneath it, including our gradient overlay, which is actually interacting with the color of our donut. We're going to go ahead here and hit OK. I'm going to name this layer swoosh 1. That's our first swoosh. Now we're going to go back to the paths panel right here, and we're going to choose path 2. And we're going to do basically the same thing. We're going to create a new solid color adjustment layer, fill it with white. Go ahead and hit OK. We can reduce the fill right here to 0. Knock out the fill. Now we can go right into gradient overlay, and we want this to be black to white as well. However, in this case, I think I want the angle to run, starting with the black over here to the left, run with the light out. That way we get sort of these shadows in the pockets of our swooshes. So we're going to go ahead and set that to 0. There we go, very cool. Again, set this guy to overlay, and what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the opacity of this guy, maybe drop him down to about 60. And you can see this really cool effect that we're starting to get, almost like the rotating blades of a camera's aperture, if you're familiar with what that is at all. If not, don't worry. But it's just a very cool sort of spiraling vortex effect, and we really haven't done all that much yet. We're going to go to inner shadow here as well, and again, we're going to set this to overlay, set the foreground color to white. We could have probably just copied this layer style right over. Uncheck global light. In this case, we want the inner shadow to be across the top of the shape. So we're going to set the angle to about 90, something like 90, 93, whatever. You don't have to be entirely precise with it, although usually the more precise the better. Set the size to 0. And we'll reduce the opacity of this guy down to about 60 as well. And go ahead and hit OK. I'm going to deselect, and you can see here is the initial shape that we've got. Now, before we go any further, the cool thing about this is because we're using all these layer styles and we're using blend modes and things like that, all I have to do to radically change the way this looks is double click on my donut color thumbnail there and change the color of the underlying layer, and the entire graphic is going to change. You can see I can really start to get all kinds of different colors and things like that. So it's a very non-destructive way to build graphics. I want to stick with an orange here and hit OK. I'm going to go ahead and rename this layer swoosh 2. And actually looking at this, I think I want to just make more of the black in our gradient here for swoosh 2 visible. You can see we've got a lot of shadowing happening here, not so much happening in these two areas. Remember, the gradient on swoosh 2 is running left to right instead of top to bottom. So I'm going to double click on that layer again, and I'm going to go to the gradient overlay. I'm going to select the gradient. Here in my gradient editor, I'm just going to drag the black stop over a little bit. It's going to give me a little bit more darkness. Great. Okay. And I'm actually going to also reduce the angle. So I'm going to maybe go -4 or 5, just something very slight. That looks cool. Hit OK, and there we go. So you can see plain donut, add 2 layers with some key layer styles, and we've got a very cool effect happening here. We're now going to begin giving some life to this. We want to add a little bit of a 3-dimensional aspect to this shape. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select the base path right there. I'm in the paths panel. And actually, I'm going to move the layers panel back in here with the rest of these guys. Just know that you create those solid color adjustment layers by hitting this icon and choosing solid color. It's going to be just off screen for you guys, but that's exactly what I'm doing. You could go layer, new fill layer. There we go. Solid color. That's how you can do it too. Hey, I just learned something too. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to Paths, select Base, and I'm going to use this newfound skill that I just gained. We're going to go New, Fill Layer, Solid Color, and we can name it if we want. Actually, we are going to name it. We're going to name it, let's go with Edge Round, because this is just going to give a little bit of rounding to the edges. Fill this with white, and we're going to go ahead and go Layer, Layer Style, Inner Glow. And actually, before I get to Inner Glow, I want to go to Blending Options up here and reduce the fill opacity to nothing again. Go back to Inner Glow, and we're going to set the blend mode to, let's go with Overlay. We've been working with Overlay. Let's set this to black and hit OK. And now we're going to increase the size. You can see as we increase the size, we really start to get this rounding effect, almost like some sort of candy. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to increase the size to about 10 or 15. If you start going too much, you really start to lose a lot of the coolness of the effect later on. It might look neat at this point in the process, but it really is detrimental to the overall look later on. And we're going to reduce the opacity to something like 10 or 15. Just a very, very slight little effect. You can see here if we shut that layer off, turn it on, it's just a very, very slight effect. Now we're going to go ahead, select the base layer, or the base path again, excuse me. Go back to our Layers panel, go Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color again, and we're going to name this guy Glow. This is going to be sort of an inner glow. We may actually, well, we are going to move it below our swooshes now that I'm thinking about it. We're going to fill it with white, and we're going to move this guy beneath the swooshes. Reduce the fill to 0. Now we're going to go Layer, Layer Style, and we're going to choose Inner Glow again. We're going to set this to Overlay, just like we have. Oh, wait, well, probably not Overlay. Let's mess with it a little bit, though, and we'll see. Let's go set the opacity to 100%, and this time we're going to set the source to center. So you can see we're really blowing out our ring here. Don't worry about that. We're going to increase the size, which is going to pull it away from the edges a little bit. So maybe increase the size to something around 50. Increase the choke a little bit to really start to pull it away from the edges. I'm ready to bump that up to about 15. And I'm not really digging the way that's looking. Let's try something like Color Dodge instead, which is really going to blow us out, but then start reducing the opacity. The key is I want to see how these look as we reduce the opacity. Let's go back to Overlay. Yeah, Overlay is just too dark. Color Dodge is cool. And we also have Linear Dodge Add. If you're using one of the newer versions of Photoshop, you have this. That's actually really, really neat. I like the way that interacts with the color. I think I'm going to go with Color Dodge in this instance and just boost the opacity just a touch. So something around 15% Color Dodge. We're using white. A choke of about 14%. I'm going to round it up to 15. And about 50 pixels size-wise. So next what we need to do is go to Satin. And in here, this really looks like we're messing things up, but don't worry. We're going to immediately go ahead and change the blend mode to Color Dodge again. Actually, let's go with Linear Dodge in this case. And set the color to white. Now we're really blowing it way out again. Again, don't worry about that. We're going to boost the distance to about, let's try 50. And then the size to maybe 130, something like that. And let's change the contour to this guy right here. It's just the second contour in. Really like that. I'm going to reduce the size, maybe about 115. Not 15, 115. There we go. What I'm really looking for is these like streaks of light running through the middle. That's really, really, really what I want. Whoop, what am I doing? Let's fix that. And let's set the distance to about 50, which is, I believe, what we had it at before. All right, something like that. Perfect. I'm loving those streaks of light that we're getting right through the middle. We want to add this three-dimensional nature to this ring, almost make it look like they're particles or elements of something floating around inside of it. We can adjust the angle if we want. I actually really like the angle. I love how we got this really crazy highlight happening up top. And then we just need to reduce this opacity way down. mean, just so we can barely see that stuff going on inside. That's just about perfect. We're going to hit OK. And you can see there's before the glow, there's after the glow. So we're really adding a nice three-dimensional element or nature to our ring here. Now we're going to go ahead and add some shadowing to the bottom of this ring and some highlight to the top of the ring, and go ahead and dump in the sort of rainbow color. If you saw here, I've got this like crazy rainbow color happening, which is super cool. What we want to do is select the base path again, go back to the layers panel, layer, fill layer. Let's actually go with gradient in this case, but before I do that, I forgot to do something. We want to make sure that our foreground and background layer, or excuse me, our foreground and background colors are black and white. You can do that by just hitting the D key. Mine already are, so I don't have to worry about that. But then we want to set white as our foreground color. Go ahead and hit X. It's just going to swap your foreground and background colors. We want white to be the foreground color. It's very important. So now I'm going to go back to layer, new fill layer, gradient. And we're going to say, well, let's just call this shine. Wonderful. And you can see right now what's happening is the gradient starting at the bottom, the white, and it's fading up. We actually want the shine to be at the top of the ring, so we're just going to go ahead and tap reverse. There we go, very cool. And hit OK. Actually, I might just angle this off to that side just a little bit. Let's maybe go 95, so we're just sort of right over there a little bit as opposed to being straight up and down. Hit OK. We're going to set this guy to overlay, and again, reduce that opacity way down, something like 30 or 40. We just really want to get it down. I'm going to go with about 30 in this case. It's all going to matter. Every ring you make is going to be a little bit different, so don't worry. Just do what looks good. Now we're going to go ahead and select the base path again. Go back to the layers panel. We're going to go layer. Oh, again, I forgot. We just need to set black as our foreground color. There's the black. Layer, new fill layer, gradient. And we're going to call this guy shadows. And there we go. He's already down there at the bottom. Great. Let's go ahead and try increasing the scale and see what that does. I don't think it's quite going to give me the effect I want. This is just going to kind of pinch it together. All right, so we're going to leave it at about 100. Fine. Go ahead and hit OK. And we're going to really reduce the opacity of this as well. Well, let's first set it to overlay. And we're going to really reduce the opacity of this, although it does look kind of cool with that really vibrant color. All right, but we're going to be introducing some very vibrant colors as well. So if you go too vibrant, Photoshop starts to go crazy and sort of wigs out on you and doesn't give very nice color at all. So there we go. We've highlighted the top and given a little bit of shadow to the bottom. So again, if we get rid of some of the stuff we just did, we're sort of back to a less fancy version of what we've got now. Great. Really liking what we've got happening here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into here right above the donut layer, and we're going to introduce our color. Go ahead and grab the paths panel, select the base, again, the base path, go back to layers, and we're going to go layer, new fill layer, gradient. And I'm going to name this colors. Hit OK. Now we're going to choose the gradient. And I have the gradient that I'm using pre-saved. It's here. I just named it mixture. But basically what it is you want to choose a reddish or a pinkish color. That's usually just where I start, the whole Roy G. Biv thing. So I've got sort of this Wendy's red, kind of pinkish red that I'm starting with. That goes on both ends. And then just add 3 color stops to the middle at 25%, 50%, and 75%. You may think more color stops is better, but again, Photoshop, when you start trying to dump in too much color, it just starts to get kind of spotty and you get like these very crazy weird lines. We're actually getting a little bit of a weird line going from the green to the blue. Maybe if I soften up that blue just a little bit, it'll help out with that. I really don't like that effect. So we're going to stick with what we've got. I'm actually just going to, maybe I'll just pull this back closer to a green. Something like so. I don't know, I'm not going to get too picky with it, but that's basically what you want to do, is just choose a red, an orange, a green, a blue, and then use that same exact red you had over on the far left, on the far right. That's the exact gradient you want. You can save it. I recommend that you do in case you're going to do anything like this in the future. Great little gradient to have. Go ahead and hit OK. And by the way, I'm not using Photoshop's built-in one. I'm not a huge fan of it. Again, just too many colors and it's too crazy. I'm going to go ahead and select mine again, and I'm going to hit OK. And all we really need to do here is change the style to angle. It's going to sort of reflect it starting from the middle right here, and it's just going to wipe the gradient around in a circle. So now we're getting kind of a cool little effect. Go ahead and hit OK. I want to actually just sort of tone this down a little bit. It's a little bit too bright, maybe a little bit too vibrant. So we're going to select the base path again, and we're going to go layer, adjustment layer, curves, and I'm just going to hit OK, and I'm going to collapse the adjustments panel. And this places that curves adjustment layer way down here. I want to drag it all the way up to the top. And what I want to do is set this guy to multiply. You're going to see it's going to darken it up quite a bit, too much. We're just going to reduce that opacity way down to about 10 or 15. Just darken it just a little bit. Rein in the controls just a tad. Well, what we also want to do is we want to create a highlight right here along this part of the first swoosh to give a little bit more definition, because you can see our little stroke is sort of getting lost in all the color there, just the way it's fading out. So we're going to sort of do that manually. Here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to control click the mask for swoosh 1 right there. So now we're selecting this whole thing. And I'm going to go layer, new fill layer, gradient. And I'm going to hit OK. Well, I'm going to name it define shine. How about that? We're going to go ahead and hit OK. And again, I've got black as my foreground color, which is a mistake. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to switch foreground and background color. So now I've got white. I'm going to double click on that gradient adjustment layer. I'm going to select my gradient bar. Then I'm going to choose foreground to transparent. There we go. We've got white going to nothing. And I just want to reverse this. So I'm going to hit reverse. Great. And I'm going to slant this off to the side just a little bit. Just a little. Right about like so. So I've got some light. And again, we're fading out to basically nothing right out here. Hit OK. Now all that we need to do is get rid of all of this that's over here. So we're just going to cover that in the mask with black. Well, as we've set up before, we have this swoosh right here. Great. And we can just select our mask and fill that with black. Go ahead and fill that with black. Command or Control D to deselect. And actually, because of the way that swoosh lines up, we've got just a little bit of a stroke happening up top and even on the inside, but I kind of like it because it matches up right there with the stroke heading into the second swoosh, so it works out nicely. And I'm just going to set this define shine layer to overlay, and I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit. So you can see there's before, there's after. We're just adding a little bit of definition to that top portion as well as the edges as it would happen to be. Next, what we want to do is just go ahead and we're going to create sort of the background and the shadow underneath this. It's really pretty easy. Actually, let's throw a stroke around this first. So we're going to go ahead and, again, select the base path, go to Layers, Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color. We're just going to name this Stroke, and we can fill it with white. That's fine. We're just going to dump the fill immediately. And I'm going to go Layer, Layer Style, and we're going to choose Stroke. Let's go ahead and, again, we're going to stick with what we've been doing. We're going to go blend mode. Actually, I think I'm going to keep it at normal, and I'm going to set the size to 2. I'm going to set the position to inside. You're going to see why in just a second, because we're sort of going to begin masking all this stuff together. And then we're going to reduce the opacity to about 10, so it's barely noticeable, and it's really not going to be noticeable over this darker gray at all. Don't worry about that, though. Now, before we go any further and sort of play with the background, which is only going to take a couple minutes, we're just going to mask all of this stuff together. We're going to use this bottom donut vector mask as our base mask, and we're going to begin using a clipping mask and just drop all this stuff right into place. So holding on your Alt or your Option key, click between each of the layers. So start with this donut layer right there between donut and colors, just like I just did. Then between colors and glow, swoosh and glow, swoosh 2 and swoosh 1, etc., etc., etc. Basically what this is going to do is just going to make sure we don't have anything hanging out off of the edge of our actual colored donut. That could really be bad. So that's just kind of a good practice to do with some web graphics if you're working with them. Just make sure you've got everything cut into the original shape so you don't have an odd shine hanging way off of the graphic or something like that, and then somebody puts it over a dark background and it's, whoa, what's going on here? Now that we've done that, we're going to really brighten up the background. So I'm going to hit Command or Control U, and I'm just going to punch in a bunch of brightness. Something like that. And you can see now we can see our stroke. Just a very subtle stroke. We're going to zoom out a little bit. There we go. Very cool. And what I want to do is I want to add some noise to this background. We're going to go Filter, Noise, Add Noise. We're going to add about 2% noise, uniform, monochromatic. We don't want to go introducing any kind of crazy colors. Hit OK. And go ahead and create a new Curves adjustment layer. So we're going to do a new adjustment layer, Curves, and hit OK. And what we're going to do, again, collapse the adjustments panel. We're going to select this Curves Adjustments layer and we're going to set it to Screen. It's going to completely blow out our background. Don't worry about that. We're going to select the mask and we're going to fill it with black by just selecting the mask and hitting Command or Control I. Flip it from white to black. The opposite of white is black. Great. And what we need to do now is grab our gradient tool and just a gradient running from black to white. I'm going to zoom out here so I can really see this. And I'm just going to pull a gradient from right about here on the ring straight over. And what that's going to do is just going to give us a little highlight along that side of our document. Just really mix things up with the background a little bit. And then if we want, we can even throw in a little vignette. We're not going to, for the sake of saving time, we're not going to mess with that. What we are going to do is we're going to create a little shadow for our ring. So I'm going to Command or Control click the vector mask and we're going to create a new layer. We're going to fill this shape with black. We're going to hit set black as our foreground color, just hitting X. Hit Alt, Backspace, or Option Delete. You can also go Edit, Fill. And now that we've filled that with black, Command or Control D to deselect. So we've got a black ring behind that. We're going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. We're going to blur it about 25 pixels, I'd say. All right, there we go. Hit OK. Command or Control T to select that. And we're just going to squeeze it way down. So we're going to push it way down here to the bottom. Like that. I'm actually going to nudge it up just a little bit. Maybe like so. Commit those changes. And we're going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur again. That's too much. We're going to try maybe 15 this time. That's still a bit too much. Let's go down to about 10. Something like that's cool. Maybe up to 12. 12 looks nice for the size document that I'm working with. Great. So 12 is cool. We're going to name that layer Shadow. And I'm going to create a new layer here. I'm going to name this layer Color Reflect. And basically, if you have a glowing object this close to the floor or some kind of surface, you're going to have a little bit of a glow. So we're going to paint that glow in. We're going to grab the brush tool, and I'm going to set my brush to about 100 pixels. Around that, hardness must be 0. We're going to be very soft. And we're going to set the opacity to about 60%. Now I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key, and I'm going to select some of this blue right up here. And I'm going to begin painting in that blue right down here. All right, so we've got some of that blue. Let's grab some of this green here. And I'm going to paint in some green right here. A little bit thicker. There we go. We're going to go with some yellow. Well, some light green, actually. And then some yellow right there. And I'm just going to paint some yellow right around there. Really get some yellow worked into there. All right, now what we're going to do with this color reflect is we're going to blur this. Oh, there we go. We're going to blur this together using a Gaussian blur again. Blur, Gaussian blur. And let's go with about 20. We really want these colors to mesh together nicely. Light doesn't have hard edges when it fades together like that. And then we're just going to reduce the opacity of this entire layer. So something like maybe 40 or 50%. I'm going to throw a mask on it. Set my brush opacity to something like 80 or 90%. Again, I'm painting with black. And I'm just going to go in and I'm going to soften up these edges a bit so we don't get blue or yellow behind our ring here. You can see just like that. We're just going to clean this up nicely, like so. So it's just a very subtle effect, but adds a bit of realism. And the last step is just going to be to throw a shadow in front of the ring that's going to sort of interact with everything. So I'm going to hit D, which is going to set my foreground and background colors back to the default. Black is my foreground color. Great. I'm just going to drag this right across the front here, like so. And I'm going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and let's go with 15. No, you know what? Let's go with 20. I actually like 20. Let's go with 20. Hit OK. And I'm actually going to make this a little bit bigger, so Command or Control T, and just stretch it out sideward just a little bit. Like so. Maybe pull it up just a smidge. Like so. Hit Enter to commit those changes. And let's go ahead and try setting this to multiply. It's not really going to do any good. Just leave it at normal, and we're just going to reduce the opacity a bit. So just to give the front of our little loop a little bit of shadowing there, just like so. So there we go. We have created, oh, you know what? Let's reduce the opacity of the shadow as well. That's looking a little rough. And there we have created a nice, vibrantly colored ring effect, completely from scratch. Hopefully you learned a little bit about paths. It was getting a little advanced there when it came to path creation, things like that. But if you stuck it out and you did this, I guarantee you have a little bit more knowledge about working with paths. Hopefully you're a little bit more comfortable working with paths, and you've learned a thing or two about working with layer styles and getting all of these layers to interact with each other. And look, all we have to do is come in here to colors, and let's choose maybe Adobe's gradient. It looks terrible. Let's try something that's just red going to yellow. We have all of these different things we can begin doing, and the graphics on top are going to automatically interact with this all of these layer styles that we've created on top of them. So it's really great. It's super easy to do. It's great as far as editing later on down the road is concerned, and it's definitely a skill that you want to work on whenever you're working in Photoshop. Whenever you can create something and work non-destructively, you definitely want to go ahead and do that. So that's it for this one. Again, make sure you check out tutvid.com and keep track of Howard and Howard over at iceflowstudios.com, as we work through this series of tutorials bringing you all kinds of great web graphics. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I hope you learned a thing or two.